Konnichiwa minasan. O genki desu ka? Welcome to the intermediate course of my channel. Let's learn Japanese with Eric. In this lesson, we will learn the verbs used in expressing giving and receiving. Ageru, kureru, yaru, and morau. Daijoubu desu ka? Ja, ikimashou. In Japanese, giving and receiving is a complicated thing. Unlike in English where you only have two verbs, to give and to receive, in Japanese, the verb to give is divided into three. First, we have the verb ageru. Then there's also the verb yaru, and there's also kureru. But the verb to receive, just like in English, is only one verb, and that is morau. There are certain rules of how to use each one, which are different than how we use give and receive in English. This lesson focuses on giving and receiving of things. The next lesson focuses on using these verbs as auxiliary verbs, which are attached to verbs to indicate the giving and receiving of actions. And the lesson after that looks at the honorific counterparts of these verbs. So in the end, you will learn 8 verbs in total to express giving and receiving in Japanese. First, let's look at the verbs that mean to give. Ageru means I give to you, first person to second person. I give to him or her, first person to third person. You give to him or her, second person to third person. Or he, she gives to him or her, third person to third person. Simply by looking at the numbers, you get a quick idea of when the verb ageru is used. Ageru is by far the most common verb used when referring to the verb to give. Yaru has exactly the same uses as ageru, except that we use yaru when the giver is of a higher social stature than the receiver. For example, a boss would use yaru when referring to giving something to a subordinate, or a mom would use yaru when giving something to her child. Or when we give something to our pets, we'd also use yaru and not the verb ageru. The third verb that means to give is kureru, and it basically means give to me or someone in my in-group. For example, you give to me or someone in my in-group, second person to first person. He or she gives to me or someone in my in-group, third person to first person. You'd also use kureru when talking to someone and referring to someone else giving something to that person you're talking to, third person to second person. Now this may all seem confusing in the beginning, but we'll look at tons of examples to clarify all these uses. Let's look at ageru. It is a ru-dropping verb. At this point, I assume you know how to conjugate ru-dropping verbs into their 10 basic verb conjugations. If not, you can review lesson 26. For our first example, let's use a simple object to give, say, money. And later on, you can always substitute money for any object. Now, first person to second person, I will give you money. In Japanese, we say, watashi wa or ga anata ni okane o agemasu. Watashi wa anata ni okane o agemasu. Agemasu means I give to you. Anata ni. Anata takes the particle ni as indirect object for whom an action is done. Now, because the default is always watashi, we don't even need to say it. And depending on the context, when it's clear we're talking about the second person, the person we're talking to, we don't even need to say anata ni. And the sentence simply reduces to okane o agemasu. Okane o agemasu. I'll give you money. Next example is first person to third person. I will not give her money. In Japanese, watashi wa or ga kanojo ni okane o agenai. Watashi wa or ga kanojo ni okane o agenai. Ageru is conjugated into the negative plain form. Agenai, not give. To whom? Kanojo ni, to her. Again, watashi wa is optional because watashi is the default. And you can simply say, kanojo ni okane o agenai. Kanojo ni okane o agenai. I won't give her money. Our next example is second person to third person. You gave her money. あなたは or が彼女にお金をあげました。あなたは or が彼女にお金をあげました。The verb is あげました, gave. To whom? To her. 彼女に. We don't cancel あなたは because it's not the default. We can only cancel あなたは as default if it were a question. So the sentence stays the same. あなたは or が彼女にお金をあげました。You gave her money. Next example is third person to third person. She did not give him money. 彼女は or が彼にお金をあげなかった。彼女は or が彼にお金をあげなかった。あげなかった means did not give. To whom? To him. 彼に。彼女は or が needs to be mentioned. So the whole sentence stays as is. 彼女は or が彼にお金をあげなかった。She did not give him money. Next verb is yaru, which functions exactly the same as ageru, but we use yaru when the giver is of a higher social rank than the receiver. Yaru is a category 2 or last hiragana changing verb. And to review its basic verb conjugation, you can watch lesson 29. Our first example is first person to second person. I will give you a car. Watashi wa or があなたに車をやります。I use やります because you are of a lower social stature than me. Maybe I'm your grandparent, you're my grandchild, I'm giving you the car as a gift, or I'm your boss and the car is your bonus. So the use of yarimasu also shows social rank. Now, because watashi is the default, I don't need to say it. You can say it if you want to emphasize that you're the one giving. And also, depending on the context, we can also omit saying anata, unless again you want to emphasize that I'm giving it to you. So the sentence can boil down to kuruma o yarimasu. Kuruma o yarimasu. I will give you a car. Next example is first person to third person. I will give the child money. The child is of way lower social stature than myself, so I'll use the verb yaru instead of ageru. And I say, watashi wa or がkodomo ni okane o yarimasu. Watashi wa or がkodomo ni okane o yarimasu. Yarimasu means to give to somebody lower than yourself. Give to whom? The child. Kodomo ni. Watashi is the default and can be left unsaid, so the sentence can simply be kodomo ni okane o yarimasu. Kodomo ni okane o yarimasu. I will give the child money. The next example is second person to third person. What will you give your nephew on his birthday? This is a question, so anata wa or anata ga is the default and we don't have to say it. So we go directly. Tanjoubi ni oigo-san ni nani wo yarimasu ka? Tanjoubi ni oigo-san ni nani wo yarimasu ka? We use yarimasu because nephew or oigo-san is lower than the uncle or aunt in social stature. Next example is third person to third person. He gave the dog water. Obviously, the dog is of a lower social stature than humans, so we use the verb yaru and not ageru. Kare wa or が inu ni mizu o yarimashita. Kare wa 彼が inu ni mizu o yarimashita. Yarimashita means gave. Gave to whom? The dog. Inu ni. Kare wa or が needs to be mentioned. We have another 3-to-3 example. The teacher will give the students a test. Sensei wa or が seito tachi ni testo o yarimasu. Sensei wa or sensei ga seito tachi ni testo o yarimasu. Yarimasu means to give. To whom? The students. Seito tachi ni. Sensei wa or sensei ga needs to be mentioned. Next verb is kureru. It means give to me or to someone in my in-group. He, she gives someone to me or to someone in my in-group. It can also mean he, she gives to you when you're talking to someone. Now, kureru is a category 1 or ru-dropping verb. This is an example of second person to first person. Won't you give me the keys? Anata wa or ga watashi ni kagi o kuremasen ka? Anata wa anata ga watashi ni kagi o kuremasen ka? Now, kuremasen ka means won't you give to me? It's a request. Give to whom? Watashi ni. Now, because the recipient is me and it's already built into kuremasu, we don't need to say watashi ni. And because the sentence is a question and the question always refers to the listener or anata, we don't need anata either. And we can just say kagi o kuremasen ka? Kagi o kuremasen ka? Won't you give me the keys? Another example of second person to first person, you didn't give me anything. Kimi wa or kimi ga boku ni nani mo kurenakatta. Kimi wa boku ni nani mo kurenakatta. Kimi ga boku ni nani mo kurenakatta. Now, kurenakatta means did not give to me or boku ni. Now, since to me is built into the verb, we don't need to say boku ni. It's better to mention kimi wa or kimi ga for emphasis, as this is a negative sentence. I'm complaining to you that you didn't give me anything. Kimi wa nani mo kurenakatta, or kimi ga nani mo kurenakatta. You didn't give me anything. This is an example of third person to first person. Dad will give me a bicycle. Otou-san wa or ga watashi ni jitensha o kuremasu. Now, kuremasu is give to me or to watashi ni. So again, we don't need watashi ni, as give to me is already built into kuremasu. Now, the giver, otou-san, has to be mentioned. So we can simply say, otou-san wa jitensha o kuremasu, or otou-san ga jitensha o kuremasu. Dad will give me a bicycle. Here's another example of third person to first person, but this time it is to give to someone in my in-group, my daughter. He gave my daughter a book. Kare wa or ga musume ni hon wo kuremashita. Now, kuremashita means give to me, but in this case, it means give to someone in my in-group, my daughter, musume ni. So we have to mention musume ni, as well as the giver, kare or him. And so the sentence is, kare wa musume ni hon wo kuremashita, or kare ga musume ni hon wo kuremashita. This is an example of third person giving to a second person. You're talking to your friend and you ask him, what did your mom give you? Oka-san wa or ga kimi ni nani o kureta? Now, kureta in this case means give to you or kimi ni. Since this is a question, kimi is the default, so we don't need to say it. Oka-san, however, needs to be mentioned. So the sentence boils down to Oka-san wa nani o kureta? Or Oka-san ga nani o kureta? What did your mom give you? The verb to receive is just one verb in Japanese, and that is morau, a category 2 last hiragana changing verb. You can review basic conjugation of u-ending verbs in lesson 29. Morau is used only when I, the speaker, or someone in my in-group, or someone I empathize with, receives something from someone. Hence, you cannot use morau when the sentence involves some sort of receive from me. When the giver is me, the first person, then the morau sentence needs to be reworded into a give sentence using the verbs ageru or yaru. We have an example of this later. This is an example of first person receiving something from you, second person. I receive money from you monthly. Now we don't need to say watashi wa or ga, as that's the default, so we go directly. Maitsuki anata ni or anata kara okane o moratteiru. Maitsuki anata ni okane o moratteiru, or maitsuki anata kara okane o moratteiru. Now, moratteiru means receiving. Receiving from who? From you, anata ni or anata kara. The giver in a morau sentence can take the particle ni or kara. Now kara means from anyway. Now just a note about anata. It's not polite to use anata unless the person is a social subordinate, lower than you socially, a friend or family member. And Japanese people instead prefer to use the person's name. So if you're talking to Mr. Hayashi, whom you receive money monthly as a tenant, for example, then you'd say, Maitsuki Hayashi-san ni okane o moratte imasu, or Maitsuki Hayashi-san kara okane o moratte imasu. I will receive money from the bank. Watashi wa or watashi ga ginko kara. Now, when you receive something from an institution such as a bank or ginko, we use the particle kara and not ni. And then to continue, okane o moraimasu. Moraimasu means will receive. And since watashi is the default, we don't need to say it. And so the sentence boils down to ginko kara okane o moraimasu. Ginko kara okane o moraimasu. I'll receive money from the bank. This is an example of a second person receiving something from a third person, but that you look to the second person as a member of your in-group. Maybe the person you're talking to is a subordinate or a family member. And the sentence, you received money from her. Anata wa or ga kanojo ni or kara okane o moratta. Moratta means received. Received money from who? Kanojo ni or kanojo kara. Now we say anata wa or anata ga for emphasis. Anata wa kanojo ni okane o moratta. Anata ga kanojo kara okane o moratta. Or any combination of wa, ga, ni, and kara. You received money from her. The sentence, Miss Tanaka received your message. This is an example of someone in your in-group receiving something from a person you're talking to. Say, Miss Tanaka is your subordinate from your department, and you're speaking to someone else from another section in the company who sent the message to Miss Tanaka. So in Japanese, we say, Tanaka-san wa, or Tanaka-san ga, anata no messeji o moraimashita. Now, moraimashita means received. Received from whom? From you, anata ni, or anata kara, or we say here, anata no, because we translated from your message into Japanese. Now, the use of anata is not really polite in Japanese conversation, so it's better to omit saying it. It's understood from the context of both parties where the message came from. So we'll still say Tanaka-san wa or Tanaka-san ga because she is the receiver of the message. Now, the sentence boils down to Tanaka-san wa messeji o moraimashita, or Tanaka-san ga messeji o moraimashita. Miss Tanaka received your message. Another example, third person receiving something from another third person, except that the recipient is a member of your in-group. In the sentence, she does not receive money from him. Maybe she's a family member or a close friend. And so in Japanese, kanojo wa or kanojo ga, kare ni or kare kara, okane o moraimasen. Moraimasen means won't or doesn't receive. From whom? Kare ni or kare kara. Now we need to say kanojo wa, kanojo ga as the subject. And so the sentence is kanojo wa kare ni okane o moraimasen. Or kanojo ga kare kara okane o moraimasen. Or some other combination of wa, ga, ni, and kara. Meaning she does not receive money from him. She received money from me. This is an example of when we need to rephrase the sentence in Japanese. Because we can't use the verb morau when you have from me in the sentence. That is, the giver is I or myself. So to say, kanojo wa watashi ni okane o moratta would be ungrammatical. And so we have to reword this to a give sentence. I gave her money. Watashi wa kanojo ni okane o yatta. Watashi wa kanojo ni okane o yatta. And now it's correct. I gave her money. To summarize, Japanese uses three verbs that mean to give. And these are ageru, yaru, kureru. Ageru means I give to you. I give to him, to her. You give to him, to her. He or she gives to him or her, and their plural variations. Yaru is essentially the same as ageru, but you use yaru when you give to someone lower in social stature than you are, say giving to a child or to a pet animal. Kureru essentially means give to me. You give to me or my in-group. It can also mean he or she gives to you when you're talking to somebody. The same principles with plurals apply. There is only one verb for to receive, and that is morau. Morau has a very specific meaning though. It essentially means that I or a member of my in-group receives from you or receives from him or her. You can say that a third person receives from you or from him or her, but that third person has to be viewed by you, the first person, as a member of your in-group. You cannot use morau for saying, you receive from me, or he or she receives from me. A receive from me sense has to be converted to a give sense using ageru or yaru. And this ends our lesson on giving and receiving using nouns. In the next lesson, we will look at these verbs of giving and receiving as auxiliary verbs that are attached to other verbs to denote the giving and receiving of actions. お疲れ様でした。If you're serious about becoming fluent in Japanese, it's important to practice daily, learn grammar, and build up vocabulary. My whole course is designed to give you a strong basic foundation in the Japanese language that you can build solidly upon. So please click like, share, or subscribe and watch the next video in the series. Nihongo no benkyou ni ganbatte kudasai. じゃあ、またね。